Today we're talking about Chapter 6, Section 1, which is going to go over chromosomes and how they are found within a cell. So one of our key concepts that we need to distinguish here is a gamete, which is a reproductive cell, like a sperm or egg cell, and how many chromosomes they have relative to your normal body cells. So these two categories of cells are called somatic if they're body cells, and then the only cells in your body that are going to undergo meiosis are going to become cells that we call gametes. So the germ cells would be the cells that undergo the process of meiosis, and that produces your gametes. Gametes are going to be the sperm and the egg cells. So the purpose of gametes is obviously going to be to pass your DNA down to your offspring. So the way this works is each gamete, either an egg cell or a sperm cell, has half the amount of DNA as a normal cell, so that when sperm and egg cells combine, you're getting half of your DNA from your mother and half from your father. Now let's talk about the chromosomes inside of those cells. You have a new vocabulary word here, homologous chromosomes. And homologous chromosomes are going to have on them genes, which are just sections of DNA, and each version of a gene is known as an allele. So that's a lot of vocabulary all at once. Let's go ahead and take a look at an example here. So we have homologous chromosomes pictured to the right. It's a pair. There's a blue one and then there's a red one. So we would call that a homologous pair. Notice that they are not X-shaped, so these are non-duplicated chromosomes, but we have one distinct chromosome here on the left, and we have a second chromosome on the right. The thing that makes these chromosomes homologous is going to be they have the same genes, meaning that they have the code for the same characteristic, such as eye color. Now, those alleles for the genes may be different. Remember, we just said alleles are different versions of a gene. So if this dark band up here at the top of your two chromosomes, if that represents the gene for eye color, maybe this chromosome on the left has the allele, which would be the actual DNA sequence of ATCG. This allele could give you blue eyes, whereas this allele might be the code for brown eyes. They're both eye color genes. They're both located in the same place on these two chromosomes, even though they have slightly different DNA sequences, which would make them different alleles. So that is our first characteristic of a homologous chromosome. They have to have the same genes. So here's our eye color gene. Maybe this is a hair color gene. Maybe this is a skin color gene. Maybe this is a gene for being able to digest lactose. Whatever it is, that same gene would be found on both chromosomes of a homologous pair. They also are going to be the same size. If you look at the length of the chromosome from top to bottom, it's the same for both members of a homologous pair. And then also the same centromere position. So here's the centromere in the middle-ish of both of those chromosomes. A centromere doesn't always have to be in the exact middle. It could be near the top, it could be near the bottom, but wherever it is, it's in the same place in both chromosomes of our homologous pair. And then finally, the third thing that all homologous chromosomes have in common is that they have the same banding pattern. This results from when you stain chromosomes under the microscope, which we're actually not going to do because we would need much more sophisticated microscopes to be able to see it. But see how we have these dark regions and these light regions? In an actual microscope view of a chromosome, you would see that same pattern of some places are going to stain more dark and some are going to be more light. And that just has to do with how tightly the DNA is wound in that region, what proteins might be associated with it, because remember that DNA wraps itself around histone proteins. So that banding pattern is going to be the same for both chromosomes in a homologous pair because they both contain the same genes. So they should have essentially the same type of DNA wrapped in a certain way. The only thing about the DNA that would be different between these two members of a homologous pair, again, would be if I look at this gene The one gene on one chromosome might have a slightly different sequence of nucleotides, A's, T's, C's, and G's, and that would be the code for one eye color versus the other eye color in our example here. So now let's talk about haploid versus diploid cells. These are going to be categories of cells characterized by how many sets of chromosomes they have. We've already talked about gametes, and we know that an organism produces gametes so that it can pass its genetic material down to the next generation. And we talked about the fact that you can only pass down half of your genetic material because each parent is passing down half of the genetic material to make one full copy of the genetic material in the offspring. So when we're talking about our genetic material, we typically talk about chromosomes occurring in sets. And a set of chromosome would be one of each distinct kind of chromosome in the cell. Like if you were to line up all of the chromosomes and pair them up with each other, if they're occurring in pairs, one chromosome from each pair would each be a distinct kind of chromosome. So one full set of those chromosomes, we call that a haploid cell. And the abbreviation for that is just the letter N, and you'll see how we use that in just a minute. Our gametes are going to be haploid cells. In fact, these are pretty much the only haploid cells that you're going to ever encounter in this class. And they're certainly the only haploid cells in your body, cells that are gametes or are in the process of becoming gametes. In humans, that means the gametes, the sperm and the egg cells, would contain one set of 23 different chromosomes. So if we were to describe a human gamete, we could describe it by saying N equals 23. Well, what does that mean? We've got some math coming into our biology here. What that means, N means number of chromosomes in one set. So there are 23 chromosomes in one set. So therefore, a human gamete should only have 23 chromosomes. So we would say N equals 23. Now, if we have a cell with two sets of chromosomes, we call that a diploid cell. Notice how our abbreviation is now 2N. Remember, N is the number of chromosomes in one set. So if the cell is diploid, it has two sets of chromosomes. So we're abbreviating it with 2N, two sets of chromosomes. These are going to be your somatic cells, your skin cells, muscle cells, the cells that line your digestive tract. All of those are your somatic cells. Anything in your body that's not a gamete is a somatic cell. Now, in humans, our somatic cells contain two sets of 23 chromosomes. You may hear this as we have 23 pairs. Two sets means that every single one of our chromosomes comes in pairs. So that gives us a total of 46. So now if we look at our 2N designation, 2N tells us we're talking about a diploid cell. The equals 46 tells us that we have 46 chromosomes in two sets, meaning if we were to divide both sides by 2, we would get N equals 23, just like we established up here. So a gamete in humans would be N equals 23, and a somatic cell in humans would be 2N equals 46. So let's remember a few things here. First of all, homologous chromosomes. Those are chromosomes that are the same size and shape, and they contain the same genes. They might have different alleles, so their DNA sequences might be different, but the genes would be the same. The gene for eye color is on both of them, the gene for hair color, whatever genes we're looking at. A set of chromosomes is the entire group of chromosomes that make up the genome of the organism. And the genome of the organism is just all of its genetic material. Essentially, if we were to list every single gene that an organism needs to survive, a set of chromosomes would be all of the chromosomes that you would need to pull together to represent all of those genes that makes the organism what it is. So here's a good way to think about it. In this diagram here, the color coding is very helpful. The color coding is showing you that there are two sets of chromosomes here. The ones that are colored red are the maternal set, meaning this organism, whatever this cell came from, it inherited from its mother these 3 red chromosomes. And then the blue ones are the paternal set of chromosomes, so the father would have contributed these 3 chromosomes. So this cell altogether we would say is 2n equals 6, because we know it's diploid. How do we know it's diploid? Well, it has a set from the mom and a set from the dad. So that means 2 sets of chromosomes. That makes it a diploid cell. And then if we look, each set has 3. There are 3 distinctly different chromosomes here that are red. We have the big one, we have the medium one, and the small one. And then we have 3 again that are blue, a big, a medium, and a small. So the 2 large ones would make up 1 pair, the 2 mediums would make up a pair. So here's our homologous chromosomes. These 2 small ones would make up a pair. So if we were to break down this equation, 2n equals 6, 2 sets of chromosomes present in this cell, 6 total, if we count them all individually, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this cell would be described as 2n equals 6. Notice we still have, this would be a duplicated chromosome, so we have 2 identical sister chromatids attached at their centromere. Now notice these homologous chromosomes, they both have sister chromatids, but this red chromatid is not a sister chromatid with a blue one, and that's because they have different DNA sequences. Remember, sister chromatids are going to be genetically identical to each other. So now let's practice with this information. You are probably going to want to pause this video and consider these 5 questions. See if you can figure out the answers to the questions. And once you have them figured out, go ahead and resume the video so that you can see if you got the right answers. Okay, now let's look at the answers to these questions. Number 1, is the cell haploid or diploid? This is going to be a diploid cell. And how do I know? There are 2 copies of each kind of chromosome. So notice that there's 2 of these really large chromosomes that have gene B. There's 2 of these smaller chromosomes with gene A. There are 2 that have gene C, and there are 2 that have gene D. So all of our chromosomes are occurring in pairs. That makes this a diploid cell. How many chromosomes total are present? That's pretty easy. There are 8. If you count them up, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then as far as how many chromosomes make up one set, this is easy because it's color-coded for you. There are 4 chromosomes in one set. Notice the 4 blue ones, that would represent the set that got inherited from the father, and the 4 red ones, which would represent the set inherited from the mother. Question 4, how many homologous pairs are there? Well, if you look, the gene A chromosome pairs up with this gene A chromosome. We have 2 with gene B, 2 with gene C right here, and 2 with gene D. So that would be 4 homologous pairs in this cell. So our last question is trying to figure out what would we abbreviate this cell as if we use this in designation. So the correct answer here is D, 2n equals 8. How do we know? Well, it's a diploid cell, so it has to be 2n, okay? Then, how many chromosomes are there in the cell? We just determined there are 8. So 2n equals 8 is going to be our designation for this cell right here. So you'll have more opportunity to practice this in class, but if you ever get stuck, I encourage you to go back and review this presentation and some of the diagrams in it, and hopefully you find that to be helpful.